Hello, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. I am Felicia Martin, the Vice President of the NCAA Eligibility Center, and also Interim Senior Vice President of Inclusion, Education, and Community Engagement. Throughout my career, I've made decisions that are student-athlete centric. I've always been a believer in the power of education, the importance of integrity, and opening the doors of opportunity when it comes to professional endeavors. Leaders must educate themselves through programs, strategic relationships, and career experiences. As a woman of color, I've found that the right exposure and strategic networking can be instrumental in progressing to executive-level leadership positions. We've created the NCAA Leadership Collective to provide exposure for our industry's most talented minority administrators and coaches. The NCAA Leadership Collective is a database that houses career profiles of ethnic minorities who are ready to step into major leadership roles. Qualified athletic administrators and coaches can create their professional profile in the collective and keep it up to date as they progress throughout their careers. Presidents, chancellors, conference commissioners, and athletic directors have access to each profile in the collective, so they can build a comprehensive list of candidates for opportunities within their respective organizations. I encourage people to visit ncaa.org/leadership-development to get more details on the NCAA Leadership Collective. This is an incredible resource for our industry. Be well.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. We are joined today by two distinguished guests. First is Dr. G. Anthony Grant. Dr. Grant is the Director of Athletics and Head of the Department of Athletics, Physical Education, and Recreation at MIT. Greetings, Dr. Grant. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
We also are joined by a longtime friend of mine, Dr. Justin Rhodes. Dr. Rhodes is the Dean for Faculty Recruitment, Development, and Diversity at Rhodes College. Greetings, Dr. Rhodes. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Yep. And if you don't mind, I'll call you guys Justin and Anthony just so I can excuse the formalities to keep the conversation going. I appreciate you guys joining us. Of course, Justin, we go back almost 20 years here in terms of our time spent at Baylor and as we were working through the early career and academic process. So I'm really happy to have you on this type of outlet with me. A little bit about your background, Justin. You've been there at Rhodes College for almost a year and a half. You're also chair and associate professor of the Department of Politics and Law. Prior to being at Rhodes, you served as the associate professor of political science and co-director of Africana Studies program at Hobart and Williams Smith Colleges. And you're also a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, and you've been in academia for almost 10 years now. So wealth of information, wealth of knowledge there in terms of honing your craft in academia. Dr. Grant, being at MIT, I think you're in your second year there, started right before the pandemic hit, right? About a month before the pandemic.
Correct.
Yep. Former director of athletics at Metropolitan State University in Denver, or MSU Denver. And you were also the interim athletics director at Millersville University in Pennsylvania. And you've been in the college athletics industry for roughly 20 years. So I'm also glad to have you on. You know a lot about leadership in college athletics, which to people who listen to this podcast is the topic of conversation usually on the podcast. The reason for this conversation is Justin has for years been crafting his career on the path to be a college president. And he's always known I've worked kind of on the periphery of college athletics, and we've always had conversations about leadership, culture, diversity, and a number of things related to college athletics in terms of understanding how important athletics has grown to a college president and how it is essentially the purpose of most athletics departments are to enhance the academic mission of the university. So that's something that's very important to the college president. Justin, if you'll correct me if I'm wrong, this is why your interest in this is important, right? In terms of being on this podcast.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what we'll do is dive right in. I want to start it off real quick, Anthony, asking you about that mission, right? Enhance the academic mission of the university. In terms of you being at MIT, you having director of athletics title, and the nature of how how and why that is important there at MIT.
Well, first and foremost, MIT has an outstanding reputation as one of the top academic institutions in the world. So when you talk about mission, academics is a clear number one. There's no mistaking that. And so everything we do is to support the academic mission of the institution, and it's also to provide a well-rounded experience for the student body. So in my position as director of athletics and department head of DAPER, this unit serves all students. So DAPER stands for Department of Athletics, Physical Education, and Recreation. So for my athletics perspective, we have 33 varsity athletics programs, so roughly 800 student athletes. We have 33 club sports, and we serve an even larger population of students beyond the varsity side. And then the physical education curriculum is a requirement for all the students that are at MIT. And then the campus recreation facilities really provides the students as well as the broader MIT population, alumni, outside members with an opportunity to recreate, develop important skills that pertains to physical and mental health and wellness. And that broad scope of our mission in DAPER aligns perfectly with MIT's mission to not only build scholars that are going to go out and change the world, but also to build healthy and well-rounded people.
Yeah, that's interesting. Justin, I'm sure you'll chime in here, especially giving us the academic perspective on campuses. I don't know if athletics is always valued by the faculty, right? Can you give us some experience with that? I mean,
Yeah, so and I think it really depends on the type of institution, but I know so I attended major research institutions, and there was a certain sense that it was kind of a zero sum game, right? Like each dollar that you invested in athletics was a dollar that you were taking away from the academic side. And there was a certain sense in which if the mission of the institution really is an academic mission, then why are we spending this money on athletics? And there was this kind of sense that it was actually hurting, right, the academics. I think though, right, Division II, Division III schools, I think the faculty tend to have a greater appreciation for the kind of well-roundedness that athletics both brings in terms of the actual students that they recruit to the campus, but also what it does for, the entire being, right, of individuals who participate in sports. So that's kind of what I've seen, faculty, how they've kind of viewed athletics. Obviously, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but that's kind of how the breakdown is kind of laid out.
yeah, I wonder, in your experience, Anthony, have you ever dealt with faculty who haven't always bought into the mission of athletics on a college campus?
Sure. Yes, I have. In my experience at multiple institutions, there has been faculty that have not understood the role of athletics. But on the flip side, there's been a lot of faculty that get it and buy in. So just, as we're talking about this, to Justin's point, I want to paint a broad brush of all faculty in terms of their perspectives on athletics. But I do think it is important when you're engaging with faculty to be able to highlight the educational value of athletics. There's a misnomer, and I think we'll get into this later on in the discussion about how faculty and those outside of athletics view athletics based off of what they see from the autonomy conferences, football, basketball. But that's not necessarily representative of all of Division I, but definitely not representative of athletics at the Division II and Division III levels. And so what athletics provides is a context for us to develop future leaders. Just engaging in athletics alone provides educational value as it pertains to time management, perseverance, the co-curricular nature of the academic mission. And if you're able to engage with faculty on that level, that helps break down some of those barriers when we're speaking with faculty that may be critical of the athletics enterprise and believes that somehow it erodes from the academic value or mission of the institution. It's really, when you talk about athletics, if applied appropriately, is a yes and. They're not mutually exclusive endeavors. And I think that's lost with some of the bigness of Division One and how it shapes people's perspectives of what collegiate athletics really is at its core.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of jump in here because I think you're right. I think it really is a both and, not a either or. And this idea of it kind of being, mutually exclusive is very problematic, particularly when you look at, some of the institutions that have the winningest programs in sports, right? They're the Stanfords and, the Michigans and Texases, so these schools that are really strong academically. So I'm just curious, what do you think kind of feeds into those misconceptions that people have about athletics and not being able to look at the entire landscape and what athletics does for an institution?
I think sometimes the messages are mixed. When you look at big time Division One college athletics, and I'm not disparaging them at all, but it's very clear the economic and financial lens and the business model is just different. And unfortunately, decisions are made that at times are counter to notions of amateurism as well as the academic enterprise. So as a result, that's what people see the most. And it's incumbent upon those of us in athletics, those allies in the faculty, to really say, hey, listen, this is really what athletics is on our campus. And this is how it is a positive addition to our environment at our respective institutions. But it takes time to understand that, and it takes some explanation, because that's not what you see on television. The legislation that's coming down the pike as it pertains to NIL, challenging antitrust, the antitrust status of the NCAA and some other things, really are based on the amount of money that those autonomy five, I don't know if it's five anymore, but those autonomy conferences are experiencing. And it's just not that experience for all student athletes at all the levels. But unfortunately, that's not what the broader population sees. And that's what shapes the notions of athletics.
So it's interesting though, because it seems to, maybe create a bit of a paradox where you have, on the one hand, people who are interested in social justice and realizing that, institutions are bringing in large revenues and yet the student athletes themselves are not benefiting from that. So they're on one sense, right, happy with the name, image, likeness kind of legislation coming down the pike, as you say. On the other hand, now we've kind of dispensed with the idea that this is amateurism, and it may, right, feed into some of our maybe worst fears about athletics and, what that would mean in terms of the student athlete. I'm curious if you see that as a paradox, or is that a false dichotomy?
The easy answer is it depends, right? It depends on what level you're at. I mean, it's a very complicated scenario, because again, you have those student athletes in those autonomy conferences, and it's not even all student athletes. Football largely and men's basketball, that you are seeing a very apparent disconnect to what the amateurism model is espoused to be relative to what is actually happening. So yes, you do see, a lot of these student athletes bringing in, a significant amount of money to the institutions. You see college coaches making millions and millions of dollars, and the student athletes are not able to benefit from their name, image, and likeness to the extent that those around them are. I'd be remiss to say not acknowledge the fact that there is value in the college scholarship. But in terms of some of these other limitations that are in place, the current NCAA's definition of amateurism is definitely antiquated, which causes the need for a significant overhaul in terms of how we define college sport, particularly at that level. So within that context, there's definitely a disconnect in terms of what the philosophy is and what the actions are. And you talked about, social justice. What we're seeing is that, our student athletes are using their voice in ways that we haven't seen before. And I think it's a good thing. I think student athletes should be using their voice and be able to ensure that they're not being put in a situation where their health and well-being compromised, put in a situation where, their name, image, and likeness, they're not being compensated for that. I will say, though, that we have to be careful in terms of identifying the student athlete as an employee. We've seen some things come through from the National Labor Relations Board, engaging in those type of conversations. I do think that is a slippery slope. I don't have an answer for that, but we need to be careful that we're not doing the pay for play and some of these other things that some of our legislators, may be proposing. That's not a route that we want to go down.
Yeah, I agree. And, as someone, I personally think about the purpose of education as, working to build up our democratic citizenry, right? So I agree with you 100% that, student athletes using their voice in the way that we would encourage any student to do so on campus is a terrific outcome of all of this. I know you're a scholar yourself and you've worked on kind of racial disparities. And, one other area I think when there's a critique of sports is the graduation rates, right? So the Knight Commission recently had a task force work on a report which pointed to the racial disparities, particularly between Black athletes and their white counterparts in terms of 6-year graduation rates. I'm curious about your thoughts on that and the role that, colleges need to do to help improve the graduation rates of its athletes.
I believe first and foremost, colleges and institutions, coaching staffs, athletic departments need to be held accountable for the graduation rates of the students. I believe firmly that when you bring a student to your campus, you have an obligation to invest in them and ensure they're put in a position to be successful and ultimately graduate and make a way for themselves as adults in our society. When you abdicate that responsibility, there's a significant problem. When you're utilizing the talents and skill sets of these student athletes, for financial gain, to increase wins and losses, to get more fans in the stands, to impress boosters and donors, but you're not ensuring that they have the supports in place in order to be successful as a student, there's a significant problem with that notion. And so I believe that it's important that those institutions are putting the appropriate resources in place to make sure student athletes are successful. And I think that when you talk about graduation rates, there's a lot of factors that play into it, because I don't want people to listen to this podcast and think that because the graduation rates are lower for Black student athletes or student athletes of color compared to their white counterparts, that Black and brown student athletes are somehow less intelligent than their white counterparts. So that is a misnomer. But you also look at maybe some of the social elements of the respective campuses. When you're bringing, students of color to the Midwest from urban cities, when, they're now only one of a handful of people of color in a predominantly white institution, that wears on you. that has an impact on, your ability to continue to progress academically. But then also, I think as the pressures to be successful um, for our Black and Brown student athletes, and leveraging their skill sets just for athletic gain, without being even more focused on their progression academically and positioning them for graduation, there's no excuse for that. And obviously, Knight Commission, has identified that, but that's something that's been identified, for years, and that's something that can't continue to go on.
Absolutely. And, I also think that there are lessons, right? I mean, you talk about bringing in a student into the Midwest from an urban area. I've worked at PWIs, attended PWIs, predominantly white institutions. And, uh, and one thing I do see, and I want to, give the plaudits to athletics is that, oftentimes they're bringing students in a team atmosphere, they're helping them, build up cohorts, build up their resiliency. So there's still lessons to be learned from athletics in that way.
That's
But,
true.
just figuring out how to make that, transition, all the way through, and not just when they, finish playing, making sure you're seeing them through, to their degrees. I know,
And Justin,
yeah, yeah,
I'm sorry if I can jump in on that point. You're exactly right in terms of the team dynamic. Most athletic departments are very intentional about that. But I would say, to take it to the next step is to try to facilitate opportunities for those student athletes to branch out and be able to be ingrained in the fabric of the institution. Because if they're in silos, then that's counterintuitive in and of itself. So it's a combination of both.
I agree 100%. Oftentimes when we bring in non-student athletes who are students of color, one of the things they have a trouble is finding their group, whereas the student athletes seem to find it and they have that transition a little easier. But then, like you said, they don't break out that silo and they never really, or, again, I'm generalizing here, but part of the danger, potential danger is that they don't expand beyond that group. And then you start to say, well, is this the point of education as well, right? You want you to be experienced the campus as broadly as possible.
Yeah, I can attest to that too.
So, I know another thing that you're really committed to, is diversifying, the leadership ranks at institutions. And so can you talk a little bit about why that's so important? That was another recommendation that came out of the recent, Knight report. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
At its core, I believe representation matters. So, Ty talked about my research when I was doing my doctoral work at the University of Iowa. I did some research on the underrepresentation of minority leaders in higher leadership positions within intercollegiate athletics. And I looked at it from diversity management theory, social network theory, and organizational culture. And, at the time, I think it was about 10 years ago when I finished my doctorate, there were 2% across all three divisions in the NCAA of athletic directors that identify themselves as Black or African American or of color. And you fast forward, there's still 2%. Maybe it might have jumped up to 3%, but it's still extremely low. And so there needs to be an intentionality in terms of diversifying the leadership within intercollegiate athletics. It's incumbent upon presidents, it's incumbent upon athletic directors, coaches, what have you. And it's everyone's responsibility. It's just not the responsibility of the leadership, of color to diversify staff. It's everybody's responsibility. But I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that as a Black male, I do feel like I've been very fortunate to have earned the position that I have and been able to move forward in my career. And it was because people, looked out for me. Is because, I put the work in, all those things. But a lot of times, all you need is a chance. And so I feel like it's incumbent upon me to give those from underrepresented groups opportunities. We talk about strategic planning, how we need to, spend a lot of time on diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, which is all important. But at the end of the day, what are you doing actively to implement the things you're saying you're going to do, but then also diversifying the workforce? And at the end of the day, I want the best possible candidate for the position. In addition to that, I want to be intentional about diversifying our pool so that gives us the best opportunity to identify a candidate that is of diverse background and is the best fit for the position. Now, you don't always have that. It's the reality of it. But for the opportunities, when you can, you have to be intentional about it. You got to go recruit. You can't be passive. And so I've been very intentional at the places I've been to really be able to try to diversify our staff, because I think it's important to have that role modeling for our student athletes. I think it's important for any organization that research has shown that if you have diversity within your leadership, you're going to be a much more effective organization, and you're going to approach problem solving in a much more effective and well-rounded way. So one, I do it because it's the right thing to do, but then also there's a distinct benefit in making sure that we have diversity within our leadership.
Yeah, you probably won't be surprised, but we have the same challenges on the faculty side and administration, the lack of diversity in the ranks, particularly at our predominantly white institutions. Here again, I think is another great place for lessons to be learned from athletics, right? One of the things I do and talk about with in my role, particularly in terms of the recruiting of a diverse pool, as you say, on the faculty side, is to start to think about, like, we're recruiting all the time, right? Oftentimes for faculty hiring, we think about we're recruiting at the time that we put out an ad. But if you really want to recruit and you want to, have a diverse pool, you got to be thinking about recruiting all the time. So anytime you're at a conference and you see someone who, you could potentially see at your institution, talk to that person, right? Even if you don't have a job, every time you create a website, right? What is your representation? What does that look like? All these things are clues that people take away in terms of, is this an institution that I want to be at? And I think oftentimes we get into the habit of saying, well, we have the job, you want the job, so therefore you should just want to be with us, as opposed to, let me tell you why this institution is a great place to work, for all people, right? And not just for people who remind us of ourselves. And that is kind of one of the challenges. And I think it's something that athletics, at least on the student athlete side, has done a good job of. And I think similarly, right, in colleges, we're seeing similar trends where we're doing a better job of diversifying our student body, but not doing a good job of diversifying our faculty and administration. But as you begin to diversify the student body, the students are saying, hey, we want people who look like us in classrooms and boardrooms, et cetera. So it's a challenge we're facing. I know we're probably running low on time here, but I want to switch gears real quick and just talk a little bit about, culture and winning. One of the things I've always been kind of fascinated with is, you have a school that is kind of a small school and doesn't have as many students as, big public institution. And yet they're able to, produce a championship football team or basketball team, or you name the sport. And I think, I'm just very fascinated about those stories about how, institutions can build winning cultures and transform cultures and sustain cultures. And I'm curious your thoughts on kind of what does it take to build a winning culture, and what are some lessons that maybe we can take from that on the academic side.
Wow, Justin, we could probably do a whole nother show.
Let's do it. Ty, have us back.
Talk about hey, Ty. We already got a part 2.
Yeah.
Lined up talking about championship culture. I am a big proponent of culture and developing culture, and it's something that has been thrown around in our society in terms of winning cultures and things of that nature. I think first and foremost, it's establishing a clear mission and vision and aligning the people and the resources to get that done. So when you talk about programs at smaller schools that thrive, there's a lot going into that. You know, it's why they prioritize that particular sport over another sport. Is it, from, at a bigger school, is it revenue? Is it enrollment at other schools? Is it there's certain sports that potentially you can leverage that campus community feel. So everybody, the example, the small school where everybody rallies around a football program, and there's a lineage there with all the alumni staying at the town and whatnot. And so I think it's really kind of defining where you want to allocate your resources and where you want to be successful and how you define success. On the other hand, you have programs that are really invested in trying to facilitate championship cultures across the entire athletics department. And I believe that makes for a better holistic experience for the student athlete. But again, it's mission alignment. What's the investment into athletics? Are we able to have the facilities we need to get it done? Are we able to have the right people in place to get it done? And is that in alignment with what expectations the institution has for the role of athletics on a particular campus? So it's a very nuanced question, and there's not always that direct algorithm as to how you can put that in place and foster it. But I definitely I definitely believe it all starts with what is the mission and vision of the institution and the athletic department, and how do you align that mission with the appropriate people and the appropriate resources in order to get it done. And that investment in that culture really provides the foundation for sustained success, as opposed to just hit or miss and lucking up into to winning. I think that short sighted. You may stumble on it, occasionally, but if there's not that intentionality and getting the right people around you, then you're not going to experience that sustained success.
Let me ask a quick follow up here, if you guys will allow me. You look at some pro sports that never have a winning season or rarely have a winning season, right? But the owner may actually feel like they are doing great business. I wonder, in your experience, Anthony, defining success, right? Whereas it's easy to look at it in terms of wins and losses. But I guess, have you experienced where the wins and losses are not necessarily on the field, but the department feels like they are actually winning, right, in terms of on campus?
Yeah. As I said early on, it's really about the student athlete experience and providing the students with the opportunity to grow and develop as people. So we're in athletics, we're competitive, we want to win, right? And I believe winning is part of enhancing that student athlete experience. But winning is a byproduct of the process and the culture. If you go into it and you're saying, I just want to focus on the winning and the outcome, then you're inevitably going to take missteps to get to that end. But if you're focusing on the right things, if you have, the right, mission, if you have the right people, the right resources, you're treating the student athletes fairly, and obviously you have the skill set to identify talent and coach and things like that, then that'll put you in a place to be able to experience winning as a indicator of success. Now, with the pro teams and things like that, should be in a different place. That's hard for me to answer, man. I'm an Eagles fan. I'm from Philadelphia, and we're not doing too hot right now. We won a Super Bowl a couple years back. I didn't think I was going to see that happen in my lifetime. I saw it, and I thought we are going to have multiple opportunities, and it's not looking that way right now. And then sometimes you just need to have be at the right place at the right time. In terms of environment and things of that nature. So there's a lot that goes into winning. It's hard to win. And so you just got to keep if you put yourself in a position where you're following the process, then the outcome will lend itself more to winning if you in comparison to if you don't have the right steps in place.
Yeah, I think this is great. I mean, you have the kind of the mission, as you said, have an alignment. You have a process in place. I think the other thing though that you talked about is getting the right people in place, right? And that seems to, maybe is finding that right coach or whatever else might go into it. But I do wonder, you see, no athletic program says we don't want to win, right? We want to win. We say we're going to, like you said, we're going to build up this culture. But then it seems like getting the right people in place is oftentimes maybe where some institutions kind of fall down. I was just wondering if you have any insight into that and what it really means and takes to get the right people on board.
Hiring as leaders, hiring is one of the most important things that you do. Our process in the places that I've been have been very thorough. Obviously we want to know that you can coach. We look at your winning percentage and things like that. But for me, I need to understand that you take your role as an educator extremely seriously as a coach. In terms of staff, top to bottom, I don't care what role you serve within the department. We're here to serve students and we're here to put them in positions for success. And the winning has to be in alignment and incongruency with the student athlete. It can't be at the expense of the student athlete. And so it's not easy to find the right people, but you've seen some schools and institutions across the country, various iterations, that will take a chance on a coach that may have an outstanding win percentage, but has NCAA violations or has some issues with conduct. And they may go to an institution and you may see success for a very short period of time, but then those indiscretions rear its ugly head. And then as a program, it sets you back even further than you might have been before you hired that particular coach.
Yeah, see, our listeners can't see, but I'm over here nodding vigorously. I'm just amazed by what you did and what you're just putting on display here, right? So, maybe implicitly what you're saying is like, winning is as you said, a byproduct, but for you, it's really about educating, right, and investing in the student athletes and the student experience. And then, right, you went on to name your values, right? This integrity and what you're looking for. So you kind of put out that mission. You talked about what it is you're trying to achieve, the real objective, right? Not the W's and L's, but the real objective. And then right now we're going to hire people that line up with that, and embody our values. And so I think that's just really amazing and speaks to, why you've enjoyed the success that you've enjoyed.
Justin, I appreciate that.
Speaking of enjoying, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you taking time out to talk with me, and Ty for setting this up. This has been great.
Same, Justin. I appreciate it, man. Hopefully this has been helpful. But I guess just for you, we probably are at time, but you talk about, from your position and recruiting and retention, for faculty and building up the team, from the academic side of the house. What are some of the things that maybe we can bring in from athletics from your frame of reference in the academia?
Yeah, I think some of it is the stuff that you're already doing, but really part of the name of the game is just always learning, right? And beginning to kind of understand what are the best practices out there and how do we continue to implement them, on the recruiting and also the retention side, right? And going back to this conversation about values, who are we as an institution, trying to be as honest about that. I think, part of where I see some trouble is when you're out, trying to recruit people that don't really line up with who you are as an institution, right? And so, what does it mean, right? So here I'm at a small liberal arts college, right? And so we place a lot of value on what we call, teacher scholars, right? And so, just because you published, 40 articles, right, doesn't mean that you're going to come in and succeed here, right? We need people who really takes educating our student body seriously and who are going to invest and who are going to be great, not only as terms of teachers, scholars, but then also, serving in our community. So, I definitely think doing the research and really, learning about the best practices. But the other thing that we really kind of have to do a lot of work on is really coming to grips with our own implicit biases. Part of what happens, when you're hiring is that you want to replicate yourself, right? Why not, right? You're such a great person, right? And so hiring, often is about replicating yourself, replicating yourself in terms of your pedigree, replicating yourself in terms of your interests and people you want to have a conversation with. And so, where athletics, I think you can kind of talk about fit. When we talk about fit on the academic side, that's a dicey term, right? Because fit has often meant exclusion.
Sure.
We want someone who will help us do things as we've always done them, as opposed to bringing in a diversity of thought and representation, as you said. So one thing we're really working hard on is working on the implicit bias that we all have, and working to check that. So that we can not only get that diverse pool, but that we also give those individuals a chance, as you said earlier.
Sure. That's great.
Excellent, gentlemen. This has been an excellent conversation. Justin, I would love to put you in front of some more athletics directors as you work on this path to becoming a college president. I've seen you grow, and I'm always interested. We're always talking about actually some of the stuff that Anthony talked about. Whereas you hire somebody whose values don't align with you or the institution, or they may align with you, but you don't align with the institution, and they get hired, success for 2 or 3 years, and they get fired. That's probably the second or third time they've had that opportunity, where there are a lot of people of color who aren't getting that first opportunity, or may not get a second opportunity because they may have graduated players but didn't win enough games, right? Which, bottom line, is important. So interesting conversation. I really appreciate both of you guys joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Ty. Appreciate it. Justin, great conversation.
Same here, man.
That was Dr. Justin Rhodes. He's the Dean for Faculty Recruitment, Development, and Diversity at Rhodes College. And Dr. G. Anthony Grant, who's the Director of Athletics and Head of the Department of Athletics, Physical Education, and Recreation at MIT. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.